He never calls it therapy. Therapy belongs to people who want out, people who see themselves as faulty machines waiting for the right mechanic. He doesn't want out. Whatever he carries has lived in him long enough to earn squatters' rights. It doesn't leave, doesn't want to leave, doesn't even pretend to. It rearranges the furniture inside his head when it gets bored, sharpens its teeth on certain memories, whispers suggestions he never asked for but always seems to follow. Therapy, in his view, is for the repairable. So he calls it the appointment. Neutral. Administrative. A calendar event like an oil change or a dental cleaning. Something with walls around it, edges clearly marked. You attend, you leave, you go, back to being yourself. If yourself is what you were before. The office lives 3 floors above a bakery that treats sugar like religion. Each time he arrives, he smells bread rising through the sidewalk grates, yeast and warmth and cinnamon, announcing themselves in waves. People line up for muffins and small talk, customers rehearsing little happinesses before work swallows them whole. He stands across the street watching them as the clock drifts toward the hour. Never early. Early suggests eagerness, or worse, guilt. He always arrives on time, exactly on time. Not because punctuality is polite, but because it is strategic. Walking in at the precise moment means the therapist never gets to see him waiting, never gets to study him while he scrolls through his phone or stares at the floor tiles. Control is a series of small victories most people mistake for coincidence. The lobby smells like every lobby in every mid-priced commercial building. A cocktail of HVAC breath, faint carpet shampoo, and industrial coffee percolating somewhere, distant but insistent. The lighting chooses the color of paperwork. The walls carry framed prints of landscapes that never existed, digital sunsets over lakes with names invented by marketing interns. The elevator arrives with the cough of old. Cables. Inside, mirrors on 3 sides offer versions of him he doesn't consult. He counts the seconds between floors, as always, storing the number alongside other useless data his mind hoards like currency. License plates, receipt totals, serial numbers on dollar bills. Useless until the day it isn't. The hallway carpet wears a migraine pattern, swirls of gray and maroon chosen to hide stains or induce them. Suite 314 waits at the far end, brass numbers tilted a fraction off level. He noticed the crookedness the first day, notices it every time, wonders if the therapist does too. The door stands open until the hour changes. Always open, as if welcoming, as if accidental. He doesn't believe in accidents inside professional. Spaces. The room beyond performs comfort the way actors perform grief. Believably, if you don't look too closely. 2 chairs facing each other at a conversational angle, a couch too soft to be honest, a small table with a lamp whose shade resembles oatmeal left too long under fluorescent lights, a bookshelf of degrees and credentials wearing dustless glass, frames straightened weekly by hands paid to erase fingerprints. A clock ticks on the wall with a second hand that jumps instead of glides, a nervous movement pretending to be time. He chooses the chair nearest the window because sitting with his back exposed feels like volunteering. The therapist takes the other chair, notebook open, pen uncapped, posture carefully neutral. The first minute always belongs to silence. It arrives like a third participant, settles between them, waits to see who will speak first. "How was your week?" the therapist eventually asks. Tone light, professional, carrying no judgment he can detect. He talks about traffic, about a neighbor's dog that howls when delivery trucks pass, about a documentary he streamed halfway through before boredom won. Words spill in balanced, forgettable portions, neither rushed nor hesitant, the verbal equivalent of polite nodding. The therapist writes occasionally, the pen moving in small bursts. He watches the pen the way other people watch facial expressions. Pens create records. Records survive rooms. He adjusts the cuff of his sleeve, fabric sliding over the faint white line of a scar. Nobody in this building knows exists. This is session 11. The first 10 unfolded as exercises in narrative architecture. He built a past out of carefully chosen fragments, some authentic, others borrowed or bent, all delivered in the right sequence to seem organic. Childhood summers by a lake, whose name he changed twice, a college roommate who brewed beer in the dorm bathroom until campus security intervened. A cross-country drive full of storms and empty diners and one flat tire near Amarillo, true enough to be harmless, harmless enough to be true. He doesn't lie outright. Lies require invention, memory, upkeep. He prefers omission, subtraction, a minimalism of self. Today feels different. Because 3 sessions ago, the therapist mentioned a city he visited once under a name not printed on his driver's license, casually, as part of a question about travel, like someone tossing a coin into a fountain to see how deep the water goes. And last time, they asked if he believed people can change, or just get better at hiding what never does. He answered neutrally, always neutrally. But he left the building carrying a small, bright suspicion the way some people carry matches. The suspicion grew legs over the week. He began replaying every detail of the room, the notebook's angle, the therapist's questions, the degrees on the wall with universities he never attended but once researched at 3 a.m. when sleep felt like an accusation. He began wondering how much the therapist knew, and from where, and for how long. So today, he will test them. He has prepared a story, a dream, completely fabricated. A dream about the river, the car, the night when moonlight looked staged, the driver's window open like a scream, paused mid-word. He will describe the watch on the driver's wrist, a detail the newspapers never printed, a detail only one living person should know, and if the therapist reacts, if the eyes flicker, if the pen stops, if the breath shortens even slightly, then this stops being therapy and becomes reconnaissance. He studies the room the way surveyors study ground they intend to bury in asphalt. Every week he records something new, a private topography of the office that exists only to be compared against itself. The plant in the corner sheds a glossy leaf every 3rd session. Someone rotates. The pot a quarter turn to hide the thinning side from the door. The lamp's pull chain hangs 2 links shorter than it should, as if a previous patient twisted it into a superstition and the superstition stuck. There is a scuff the size of a thumbnail on the baseboard near the bookshelf. It moves 1 inch, left, 1 inch right, depending on how the cleaning crew drags the vacuum. None of this matters, and all of it does. Change is either message or noise. He refuses to be surprised by either. The therapist's habits form their own map. The pen rests on the pad at a slight diagonal when they want him to keep talking. It sits perpendicular to the pad when they intend to speak. The left hand drifts toward the jawline whenever he mentions sleep. Ankles cross when money appears in a sentence. Uncross when family does. When he speaks of cities, the therapist's pupils flatten by a fraction, the way a camera adjusts to light. He files each adjustment under a label that doesn't exist. In the DSM, but should. Appetite. Outside the window, the bakery queue grows, then dissolves, replaced by the late-morning flow of people who mistake motion for improvement. Sirens drift up the block and fade into smaller emergencies. A delivery truck idles long enough to rattle the glass. He watches heat shimmer above the hood and imagines it as a weather system trapped 5 feet off the ground. The city continues, its choreography of effort and accident. He prefers rooms to cities because rooms can be counted. The therapist asks about goals for the week, about small practices that might increase clarity, about whether he noticed any patterns he'd like to examine. He notes the plural, practices, patterns. Plurals dilute responsibility. He answers in a way that would pass an audit. He talks about forming a morning routine, about stepping away from screens before bed, about the usual posture checks a modern conscience performs to keep the insurance premiums low, the therapist writes. He tries to see the words through the slant of the pad and resists. Knowing the exact phrasing would be a luxury. Guessing the shape is enough. He inventories his own, tells and practices on them the way athletes practice injuries. Breath stays level. Shoulders relaxed but not theatrical. Hands visible, never clenched. He lets a laugh appear when a laugh should, because absence can be louder than presence. He allows a pause long enough to be read as thought, not long enough to be read as withholding. Most people think control is rigid. He knows control is supple, responsive, a muscle best used under low weight for high repetitions. What changed, truly changed, was not a question the therapist asked, but a reference they didn't have to make. The mention of that city slid inside, a harmless inquiry about travel, and the name sat on the air like something fresh from a wallet. It could have been coincidence. The world is generous with those, but coincidence rarely arrives dressed in context. 2 minutes later, they mentioned a story in the news, an old story as far as headlines travel, about a car and a river and a night with more moon than anyone asked for. The article everyone read used bland nouns like tragedy. The article, nobody. Read was never published. Only one detail matters from either version, and the room should not contain it. He replayed the exchange afterward in his kitchen, a room that resembles a storage unit pretending to be domestic. He put the kettle on without turning the burner. He stood still long enough for the clock to argue with itself. Then he took from the drawer a small notebook that contains nothing except questions that do not want answers. He wrote 3 lines: how, since when, and for whom. He left the page open overnight as if sunlight could metabolize suspicion into something the body can use. By morning, the questions had multiplied. Curiosity in other people is hunger. In him, it is architecture. He built possibilities the way some men build model trains. Perhaps the therapist is simply good at pattern recognition, and the city name fit a template their mind already held. Perhaps the therapist knows someone who knows someone, and the 6 degrees most lives require collapse to 2. Perhaps there is a file. Perhaps there is always a file, and the therapist has been reading it aloud without moving their lips. There are rules for this kind of uncertainty. Rule 1. Never confirm an opponent's knowledge for them. Rule 2. Never accuse a room of being something you cannot exit without proving your own claim. Rule 3. Test gently enough that retreat still looks like strategy. He shaped the dream accordingly. Dreams are permitted to be strange, permitted to be specific, even permitted to be wrong. Dreams are the only testimony that can carry a lie into court and exit with sympathy. He constructs the dream like a stage set. The river folds around a bend where frost eats its own reflection. The car sits below the surface, roof a dull rectangle, headlights failed, the water denser than it appears in photographs. The driver's window stands open like a mouth losing, an argument. A wrist rests against the steering wheel, slack, the watch band cracked at the notch it visited most. The band was leather, brown, worn to a lighter tone where sweat did the work of sandpaper. There are other details he could use: smell, temperature, the high-frequency whine beneath the obvious roar, but he chooses restraint as if subtlety were kindness and not camouflage. Session 11 now curves toward its middle. The therapist tilts the pen into the diagonal that means continue. He speaks about concentration, about the way silence can ring if you hold it long enough, about the way certain memories arrive with their own humidity. He says he has been remembering more dreams. He watches the therapist write the word dreams and wishes irrationally to see the shape of the letters. He will not describe the river yet. He delays to measure appetite. He talks instead of smaller, harmless dreams, elevators that open directly into streets, corridors that loop back to their own beginnings, a library where all the books contain the same paragraph copied by different hands. He observes the therapist's posture for signs of interest and sees only the steady incline of professional patience. They could listen to him list rivers for an hour if the hour required lists. The appointment's air shifts at predictable marks. At the 30-minute line, the therapist often changes the angle of a foot. At 35, they glance, never obviously, at the clock in a way that a trained eye could call calibration rather than impatience. At 40, they sometimes offer a reflection, the gentle mirror professionals hold up when they want someone, to notice the shape of their own head. He times his breath to the schedule without appearing to. He wants the dream to fall between reflection and wrap-up, in the region where attention peaks but conclusions cannot be written before the door opens. He inventories the therapist's shelf again. 1 degree from a university that advertises during basketball games, 2 certificates from workshops that sound like weekend camps for careful people, 1 thin book with a spine that suggests it has been opened many times by thumbs that never turned it all the way. No family photos, no artifacts that admit to a life outside the chair. Asceticism as decor. He respects it. He does not trust it. Below, the bakery bell rings at intervals the building exaggerates. A child laughs, the sound brittle at this height. Tires hiss through a crosswalk where paint tries and fails to remind drivers of promises. He catalogs the street without looking because he has already looked. The city outside persists in being the city. He returns his gaze to the therapist and thinks about the single advantage rooms have over avenues. Doors. He prepares the transition the way bomb technicians prepare both hands. He will speak of water first, then the way water complicates time, then the way time complicates guilt. Only then will he mention the wrist and the watch band, and he will mention them as if the detail embarrassed him. Embarrassment is a bridge most people cross without checking the weight limit. He lets the silence expand a notch. The therapist waits, pen at the diagonal, eyes in the soft focus that communicates engagement without ownership. Once, years ago, he practiced that exact gaze in a mirror to see what he looked like to other people when he pretended to be one of them. The performance was passable. It always is until it isn't. He thinks about the first time he allowed anyone to call what he does a problem. It wasn't an admission, not really, more like a test of how the word would taste in a stranger's mouth. The stranger used the word carefully, like glass. The stranger had no idea how many other words he had eaten already. He left that office with a brochure and a polite promise to return. He didn't. Return is not a verb he gives out freely, and yet here he is, in a room, 11 sessions deep, telling the truth sideways to a person trained to find the front door of it. He cannot decide if this makes him reckless or bored. He cannot decide if it matters. He takes a breath he does not need, but the room expects. The pen tilts. The second hand steps forward with its cautious jerk. He imagines the dream opening like a file. He touches nothing else in his mind, a surgeon insisting the instruments find the tray he set out and nothing more. He begins to speak about water. He begins to build the river. He places the car where it belongs, below the surface, not moving except for the long, slow shift of things surrendering to other forces. He says he has been dreaming about it without saying why it would visit him now. He offers the therapist the gift of ambiguity and watches to see if they decorate it or return it unopened. He is close now, 1 sentence from the watch band. The city outside changes gears. The building hums as if the elevator remembered it left someone behind. The therapist makes a small note. The pen pauses half a beat longer than gravity requires. He wonders for the first time in months whether the appointment has been hunting him longer than he has been hunting it. He waits until the room exhales. The therapist looks down at the notes again. Posture unchanged, the line of their shoulders flat as weather on an empty horizon. He senses the clock inching toward the appointment's last third, the place where words must either bloom or die in their stems. So he gives them the dream. He tells it slowly, arranging each sentence the way careful hands arrange glass on a high shelf. The river. The car below the surface, roof pale as bone. The window open like a question left unanswered. He keeps his tone flat, almost apologetic, as if ashamed to remember it at all. Only then does he describe the wrist. The watch. Brown leather. Band. Cracked where the buckle always sat. He doesn't look at the therapist when he says it. He watches the lamp instead. The pull chain trembling faintly in air, the vent keeps moving. He counts 1 second, then 2, before letting his eyes slide back toward the chair opposite his. The pen has stopped, just for a breath, but enough. It hovers above the page as though waiting for instructions from somewhere outside the room. The therapist's face holds. Professional stillness practiced across hundreds of hours, but the pause glows inside it like a coal under ash. He feels the air change, almost nothing, a shift in temperature rather than sound, the kind of shift predators feel in grass before the first hoof moves. He leans back, nodding as if finished, as if the dream were only a dream, as if he hadn't just confirmed something neither of them has the courage or the need to name. The therapist writes again, slower now. The pen moves, but something else in the room does not. He smiles faintly where they can't see it. Next week, he thinks, the real conversation begins. The session ends as if nothing unusual happened, as if the dream were just another story from just another patient and the room wasn't holding its breath for half a second too long. The therapist thanks him. Same tone as always, same measured politeness. They say, "See you next week," like every other week before this one. But when he leaves, the air outside feels heavier, as if the building exhaled something it meant to keep inside. He moves through the bakery downstairs, past shelves of bread, still warm enough to steam the air. People line up for baguettes, cinnamon rolls, pastries stuffed with sugar and fruit, and the illusion that mornings can be fixed with frosting. Their lives revolve around commutes, work emails, after-school pickups. None of them notice him. That suits him fine. The city outside throws its usual noise across the afternoon. Horns braying in frustration, brakes screaming at yellow lights, delivery trucks performing slow-motion ballets with bicycles and pedestrians. Somewhere, a siren bleeds through it all like a violin string pulled too tight. But under the city's soundtrack, a thought runs on repeat. The pen stopped. Half a second, maybe less, enough for him to see it, enough for him to know it wasn't random. He takes a long route home, weaving through side streets where trees lean over sidewalks like eavesdroppers. His mind inventories the pause again and again. The pen mid-word, the therapist's face still professional, but just a fraction too still, like someone remembering the next line of a script written by someone else. It wasn't shock. Shock looked sloppy. This looked contained. He doesn't like contained. At home, he doesn't turn on the lights right away. He sits at the kitchen table staring at the blank window until his reflection fades into the night outside. Then he opens the notebook. One word on the top line. New. Under it, 3 questions. How long? From where? Why now? He adds a 4th. Who else? The tea kettle starts whistling. He doesn't remember filling it. He lets it scream until the water burns itself down. To silence. The next appointment is 7 days away. That's too long to wait with a question like this one crawling around inside his head. He begins making lists the way other people say prayers. Possibility 1. The therapist guessed, nothing more. Maybe good instincts, too much training. 2. Many textbooks. Possibility 2. Someone told them. But who would that be? Possibility 3. There's a file somewhere. A report, a document with his name attached to events the news never solved. Possibility 4. The therapist knows because the therapist was told to know. He writes the last one slowly, each letter pressed hard enough to dent the page beneath. Then he crosses out told to no and replaces it with paid to no. The clock on the wall ticks like an apology. By midnight, the lists fill 3 pages. Lines connect names to dates to places where nobody should have been watching but apparently was. He tries to sleep. Fails. The dream he invented for the therapist shows up anyway, replaying itself behind his eyes. The river, the car, the watch band, cracked across the wrist. Only this time someone stands on the riverbank watching. Someone holding a notebook. By morning, the question has grown teeth. He walks through the day carrying it the way some people carry injuries. Carefully, like the wrong move might make it obvious. Conversations at work skate past him. Emails stack up, unanswered, their subject lines muttering deadlines he doesn't hear. Every 7 minutes he checks the clock without realizing. Every glance lands on the same thought. The pen stopped. Late afternoon, he can't stand the waiting anymore. He returns to the building just before closing, the hour when hallways smell like lemon cleaner and the air carries the tired hum of fluorescent lights. The bakery below sweeps flour off tile. Upstairs, offices lock their doors one by one. Suite 314 sits behind its usual brass numbers. Door locked, blinds drawn. Locks don't bother him. Locks are invitations carved into metal. Inside, the therapist's office feels different without the therapist in it, like a stage waiting for actors who may never come back. The chairs sit angled toward each other, mid-conversation forever. The lamp stands dark, its pull chain motionless for once. He ignores the furniture and heads straight for the desk. 2 drawers, one locked, one not. The unlocked drawer holds paper clips, receipts, a bag of almonds folded shut with a binder clip. The locked one opens after 90 silent seconds. Folders wait inside. Not many, but enough. Each labeled with dates in neat handwriting, each holding pages filled with the therapist's careful clinical sentences. His name sits on the most recent folder, ink darker than the rest. He scans the top page under the glow of his phone. Most of it reads like textbook psychology. Observations about tone, posture, emotional range. Nothing dangerous yet. Until halfway down the page, client may be withholding significant information regarding past events involving potential harm to others. Possible connection to unresolved incident referenced in local news archives. See attached. Attached. He turns the page, a photocopy of a news article, edges smudged from handling. Headline: Vehicle recovered from river, driver missing, foul play not ruled out. No names printed. No suspects mentioned. Just weather conditions, water levels, divers quoted about currents too strong for a safe search. But a single line sits circled in pen. Authorities have not identified the victim pending notification of next of kin. In and see below that, in smaller handwriting, identity never confirmed. He puts everything back exactly where it was. Relocks the drawer, straightens the almonds. Leaves without touching anything else. On the sidewalk, the air feels sharper, the kind of cold that makes windows reflect more than they reveal. The therapist doesn't just suspect, they're looking for proof. And proof has a way of cutting in both directions. The discovery follows him home like a shadow with its own agenda. He sits in the dark kitchen long after midnight, lights off, the city outside dripping car noise and sirens into the apartment's thin walls. The folder's words replay in loops, withholding information, unresolved incident, identity never confirmed. Each phrase fits around his ribs like a belt, tightening one notch at a time. It wasn't just suspicion. The therapist had evidence. Not enough to name him, but enough to keep looking. Enough to start connecting dots until the picture sharpened into something dangerous. He lays out the facts on the table in front of him. invisible pieces of a puzzle no one asked him to solve. The therapist knew about the river. They knew someone disappeared that night. They suspected him, but didn't have proof. And then there was the dream, the watch band detail, the pause. The pen stopped because the pen recognized something it shouldn't have. He lights a cigarette even though the lease forbids it. The building has bigger problems than smoke damage. If the therapist knows, what comes next? A call to the police? A quiet conversation with someone who knows someone? Or worse, another conversation with him, pretending therapy while measuring confession against risk. The idea of sitting in that room again feels like swallowing glass. But waiting feels worse. He decides the next session won't happen on their schedule. 3 nights later, he sees the therapist leave the building after hours. They exit with the slow posture of someone finished with paperwork and pretending not to be lonely. A leather bag hangs from one shoulder, the kind that carries either tax returns or indictments. They walk east, toward the district where storefronts alternate between laundromats and late-night bars with neon promises. He follows at a distance comfortable enough to pass for coincidence. The therapist stops at a diner with windows fogged by decades of coffee steam. Inside, truckers and night shift nurses eat pie at booths polished by elbows older than both of them. He watches through the glass as they order tea, open a notebook, begin writing. He wonders if the notes are about him. Back at his apartment, he sketches possibilities across 3 pages of his own notebook. They tell no one. They collect evidence for personal curiosity, some private obsession with crime the way some people obsess over chess problems. They tell the police. They believe. Justice works the way textbooks describe it. They tell someone worse, someone who doesn't call lawyers before sending people. Number 3 chews at him the longest. The next day, he calls the office line from a payphone 2 neighborhoods away. The therapist answers on the 3rd ring, voice neutral, professional, like strangers speaking across a library table. He doesn't identify himself. Just breathes once, then hangs up. He waits. 2 hours later, his phone buzzes. Unknown number, 1 sentence. If you want to talk, come tomorrow evening, after hours. No charge, no charge, as if money were the issue. He deletes the message but memorizes the time. The office after dark feels wrong in ways daylight never shows. The hallway hums with vending machines and the occasional cough of the elevator cable settling for the night. Suite 314 waits with its door half open, lamplight pooling across the carpet like something spilled. The therapist sits in their usual chair. The other chair waits empty, patient as a trap. He steps inside, but doesn't sit. You looked in my files, the therapist says, not a question. He doesn't answer. People who break into offices usually want something. They continue, tone still professional but thinner now, stretched like paper near tearing. Do you want to tell me what that is? He studies their face the way surveyors study land before deciding where to dig. You think I was there, he says finally. I think you know more than you've said, they reply. Silence folds over the room for several heartbeats. The clock on the wall ticks like a hammer softened by distance. Then the therapist says, the police missed things. People always assume investigations are thorough. They rarely are. He waits. I've seen cases like this before, they add. Families, left with questions because someone decided answers were inconvenient. The word someone lands heavier than the rest. He wonders if they're accusing or inviting. Either way, the room feels smaller than when he entered. He stands without sitting, and the room measures him. The door remains half closed. The lamp spreads. Its small circle, the degrees on the wall perform their mute endorsements. The therapist waits in their chair with the posture of someone accepting whatever arrives, which is either courage or choreography. He decides it is both. He does not speak in sentences meant for transcripts. He lays out facts the way a surveyor lays out stakes: the drawer, the folder, the photocopy, the annotation about identity never confirmed, the pause after the watch band. He watches for denial and receives none. The therapist meets the inventory with a steady nod that admits what it admits and refuses to give away what it doesn't have to. They indicate, without words, that the file exists for one reason only: because gaps in official stories attract careful people the way open wounds attract flies. He notices then what he missed on entry: the faint glint near the bookshelf where the molding doesn't sit flush. A lens the size of a shirt button watches the room. He adjusts nothing in his face. Cameras are not threats. They are time made obedient. But he files it with the rest: the after-hours invitation, the unlocked door, the placement of chairs that keeps him in the camera's eye and the therapist just at its edge. The therapist moves a hand toward the notebook as if to summarize. He shakes his head. They understand. No notes tonight. The room must be allowed to breathe without paper catching its breath. He approaches the window and looks past his reflection into the street. The bakery's sign is dark. A trash truck grinds. By metal teeth chewing yesterday. A man in a hooded sweatshirt crosses against the light and vanishes into the parking lot. The city rearranges itself because that is what it knows how to do. Behind him, the therapist speaks in a voice trained for weather, describing patterns rather than storms, causes rather than blame. They outline what investigations actually look like when they do not have television's budget. Missed details, assumptions hardened into policy, families forced to memorize the wrong endings. They remark, almost idly, that certain facts show up in dreams only when they were first seen. While awake, he hears the sentence settle like a coin at the bottom of a jar. He tries on a different posture, the posture of the patient, the one who brings confusion to a professional and asks for translation. He asks, without asking, what someone in his position should do if they feared an old river might find its way into the present. The therapist answers, without answering, that the present is not a river, it is a ledger. Things either enter it or they don't. If they enter, they can be audited. If they don't, they can be buried until the ground shifts. He realizes then that the appointment has ceased being about him and has become a negotiation between versions of the same hour. In one version, he walks out and never returns, and the therapist files what they can with people who will either care or pretend to. In another, he stays, and the hour accepts a task neither of them is paid to finish. He chooses a third version. He leaves the room intact but refuses to let the story be written by people who were not there. He steps into the hallway and listens to the building's night lungs. The elevator lines hum in the shaft. Somewhere a machine turns itself off with a plastic sigh. He walks the stairs down to the lobby and stands in the vestibule long enough to feel watched. When the feeling thickens, he pushes into the street and becomes motion. The first rule of being observed is to provide nothing but the obvious. 3 blocks later, he confirms what he already knew. A car shadowing with the patience of salary. Dark, unadorned, the kind that disappears in police reports as a sedan. It keeps a respectful distance, not eager, not clumsy. He cuts left into a narrow street where the asphalt buckles, backtracks through a bank's parking lot, crosses a strip of grass someone once called a park in a grant application, and comes out 2 streets over with no headlights behind him. When he looks again, the sedan returns from a different angle, as if the driver has been practicing this part longer than he has. He doesn't go home. Homes are places where people knock. He goes instead to a storage facility that pretends to be a neighborhood by giving each door a number and a color. He opens his unit, inventories the expected, closes the door again without removing anything. He stands in the dark aisle, listening to the air until his breathing and the building's breathing agree on a tempo. Near dawn, he parks where he can see the therapist's building without being a sight himself. When morning delivers its ordinary rituals, trash pulled to the curb, buses coughing frost, office windows acquiring their first faces, he watches Suite 314's light. It clicks on, clicks off, clicks on again, the pattern of someone unsettled, by routine. He counts the minutes until the hour. At precisely the hour, the door opens and a patient enters. The camera above the molding will record another confession and another attempt at sense. He wonders how many of those recordings hold details like watch bands and windows. He attends his own day with the indifference his day deserves. Emails like gnats, colleagues asking for favors with the soft clatter of spoons against ceramic. His body performs competence while his mind maps routes he may need if the ledger tries to write him in without permission. In the evening, a letter waits taped to his door with painter's tape that won't damage the frame. No stamp, no envelope, just a single sheet folded once. Inside, a photocopied photograph, a riverbank at night, a rescue truck's lights bouncing off water, a ribbon of police tape catching dew. On the back, in the same neat hand he saw in the folder, one sentence. The watch band detail was never public. No signature, no threat, only proof that he is not the only person doing arithmetic. He tears the copy cleanly in half, then in half again, confetti for a parade no one will attend. He flushes the pieces down a toilet that refuses to dignify, the moment with a sound worth remembering. The next appointment arrives without his consent, as appointments do. He goes anyway, because absences leave shapes the living cannot help but fill with guesses. The waiting room holds a new magazine no one will read. The plant in the corner has been rotated a quarter turn. The clock on the wall adds its little jumps to a pile large enough to be called a morning. Inside, the therapist waits with the same chair, the same lamp, the same degrees, but not the same room. The room has learned him and has therefore changed. He sits and declines water. The therapist asks how he has been sleeping, and he supplies the answer acceptable to forms. He mentions dreams as if they have grown less frequent. He says nothing about the letter. The therapist does something new. They acknowledge what they know. Not the specifics, not names. They say, in the careful language of professionals, that sometimes lives accumulate events that do not dissolve on their own. That sometimes the right thing to do is the thing most people would not recognize as right until someone draws them a map. He responds with a story that is also a test. A tale about a man who once found a thing in the dark that did not belong to him and returned it to the light because the light was the only witness that didn't lie. He watches the therapist leave the story alone, respecting its edges, refusing the invitation to turn it into a parable. He counts that as the first honest thing the room has done for him. He leaves with the same polite closure and the same corridor quiet. But the quiet contains a new component, a shape that might be a plan. That night he walks the river. Not the river, but a river. This city's water, with its own bridges and benches and memorial plaques naming donors who liked bronze. He stands where the guardrail ends and the concrete begins and lets the cold explain solidity. In the water's surface, he sees street lamps dragged long like silver wires. He does not see a car. He does not need to. He thinks about the watch band and tries to remember the exact shade of the leather before the river taught it a new color. His phone buzzes once in his pocket without lighting the screen. A message from a number that changes each time. 4 words. Do not hurt them. No subject, no pronoun clarified, no promise attached. He pockets the phone and continues walking. People who give orders without stakes do not understand verbs. A week becomes 2. The sedan appears and vanishes on a schedule, too irregular to be accidental. The therapist continues to show up for work, to sit in the chair, to write with a pen that no longer pauses at the wrong times. He notes that their handwriting has changed slightly. The loops are tighter, the lines straighter. He wonders if he has done that to them or if something else has. One evening, after the last patient leaves, The therapist exits the building and heads for the diner where tea has the color of old ambition. He follows again, not close enough to join the reflection in the window, but close enough to catch the rhythm of their shoulders when a door opens. He watches them open a notebook and write a single line, then close it as if the line were dangerous, to breathe for long. On the walk back to the office, a man falls into step half a block behind the therapist, not the sedan driver. New shoes, new gait, new idea of what evening means. The man accelerates to close distance. The therapist doesn't turn. The therapist has lived enough evenings to know what distance feels like. He crosses the street without signaling and puts a rack of parked bicycles between himself and the approach. The man adjusts. The streetlight above them flickers twice and settles on dim. Elias calculates. Intervene and become part of a record, or let the city practice its usual arithmetic. He chooses a third option. He steps into the man's path 2 storefronts later, not as a wall, but as a detour. A dropped key, a polite apology, a moment's confusion. The man recalculates and takes the noon-lighted corner that leads away from the therapist's door. The event dissolves into traffic. No one is saved exactly. The ledger simply did not add a line today. He does not tell the therapist. Rescue demands a receipt, and receipts are exactly what he cannot allow. The following week, the therapist changes the office. The camera near the molding disappears. In its place, a patch of paint almost the right color. The desk drawer acquires a new lock with a keyway he could open but chooses not to. The lamp's shade is replaced by one a degree warmer. The couch remains too soft for honesty, but he sees the indent where someone else tried recently. The room, is both repaired and not. They begin the session with something like a risk disclosure, if such things existed in counseling, a statement about duty and confidentiality and the line between safety and secrecy. The therapist leans on words like obligation and harm, leaving just enough space around justice that it doesn't sound like a slogan. He listens without letting his face confess. The therapist adds that sometimes truth can be told to more than one audience at a time, that it doesn't always belong in a courtroom to be true. He thinks of the river again and of the many audiences it has already entertained. Divers, reporters, a handful of mourners who never knew precisely what they mourned. He imagines adding one more, a single person sitting in a room with a lamp the color of oatmeal. He finds the idea intolerably intimate and therefore potentially useful. The sedan vanishes for a week. In its place, a different pressure. A letter from an attorney he has never hired, inviting him to consider consultation on a matter of personal reputation. It contains no details, only a phone number, which he does not call. When he tears the letter in half, a business card falls out. The therapist's name, printed on one side, with a note on the back in a hand that is not theirs. You're not. The only person trying to keep the ground from moving. He returns to the office unscheduled. The door is closed, the lamp is on. Voices murmur inside. 2 people practicing an ending. He waits in the hallway until the handle turns and a woman exits with eyes red enough to turn stairs into an ocean. He lets her pass. Inside, the therapist looks smaller and older, which is to say exactly like someone who has listened too long. He nearly leaves without entering but steps across the threshold out of habit. He sits without approval. The therapist does not ask why he is there. They rearrange nothing to make room for him. They simply look at him as if the camera had never existed and say, without quotation marks, the only thing that could move the hour forward, that knowing and proving are different jobs, and not every truth wants both. He watches their face, for the tremor that betrays performance and finds none. The pen, when it finally appears, writes nothing. He talks then, not confession, not exoneration, not even narrative. Fragments, arranged like stones laid across a stream, enough to cross, without revealing what lives in the water. He mentions the weight of certain objects, the sound concrete makes under tires at 2 a.m., the way moonlight can fool you into thinking metal is clean. He leaves out nouns. He lets verbs do the work. When he finishes, the therapist has not moved, except to breathe in a way that suggests relief rather than victory. On his way out, he pauses in the doorway and measures the hallway for risk. At the far end, the sedan idles in miniature inside the reflection of the exit glass, or else it is memory pretending to be chrome. He takes the stairs because elevators add witnesses, and he has enough of those. Outside, wind unthreads itself along the avenue. The city's evening opens its usual mouth. He walks with hands visible and shoulders casual. The street lets him pass as if he belonged to it, which he does, the way weather belongs to a coastline. The message arrives at midnight. 3 words from no one. We are waiting. He imagines a committee behind pronouns, imagines a long table and a pitcher of water, sweating into paper coasters. He turns the phone face down and lets the phrase join all the others in the room, phrases that promise gravity and deliver only time. When morning arrives, the bakery resumes its liturgy. The elevator coughs him up the shaft. The carpet offers. It's migraine. Suite 314 opens on schedule. The therapist's chair is still the therapist's chair. The lamp is still itself, minus the old shade. He sits, he breathes, he holds his part of the air. The therapist nods once in a way that resembles a truce between weather systems. He understands then that escalation is not always explosion. Sometimes it is the slow pressure of 2 truths learning to occupy the same square footage. The river happened. The watch band existed. The identity was never confirmed. The present prefers ledgers to legends. He can live inside that math for a while. Still, he draws new routes in his notebook, plans for doorways and alleys and elevators that stop 1 floor short. He lists 3 names that must not meet and 2 that eventually will. He writes a single sentence and circles it until the paper thins. If the room knows enough, the river can stay a river. He closes the notebook and counts the seconds between floor and floor, ready again to be measured by rooms and followed by cars and written about by pens that now refuse to pause at the wrong site. He leaves the office and does not look back. The glass in the door reflects a man anyone could mistake for harmless, which is, for now, the safest shape truth can take. The clock on the wall kept ticking, steady and indifferent, each second cutting deeper into Michael's nerves. He sat, frozen in the chair, shoulders hunched, the knife still hidden beneath his coat like a secret he hadn't decided to tell yet. Across from him, the therapist didn't move. Not a twitch. Not even the polite frown most people wear when they sense danger but want to pretend they don't. He just sat there, calm as a monk, eyes fixed on Michael like he was watching an animal in a cage too small for it to pace. "So," Michael said finally, his voice dry as paper, "you know everything." The therapist tilted his head ever so slightly, the faintest nod. Michael laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "All this time. I thought I was the hunter, thought I was clever, thought I was running the game." Still nothing from the therapist. "Knew," Michael said. It wasn't a question anymore. "You knew about the letters, about the names, about what happened in that motel, about the brother." His voice cracked. "You even knew about him before I did, didn't you?" The therapist didn't answer. Michael slammed his hand on the arm of the chair. "Didn't you?" Finally, the therapist spoke, voice calm as falling snow. "Yes." 1 word. That was all. But it hit like a hammer. Michael's laugh turned shaky. "And you just sat here week after week, letting me talk, letting me think I was the one in control." The therapist said nothing. He didn't need to. Michael leaned forward now, eyes wide, a snarl curling at the edges of his mouth. "Then you know what happens next." The therapist's gaze didn't flicker. "Don't you?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, the therapist said again. Michael rose from the chair slowly, like a puppet pulled by strings too tight. The room felt smaller now, walls closing in, air thick enough to choke on. "Then you know," Michael said, voice trembling with fury, "that I can't let you live." The therapist remained seated. No flinch, no panic, just the faintest smile, the kind people give when they've seen the ending before the story even began. "Do what you must," the therapist said softly. Michael froze, because this wasn't fear. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't even resignation. It was acceptance. The therapist knew, not just about the past, about the future, about this exact moment. Michael's hand shook as it reached under his coat. Fingers closed around the handle of the knife. The metal was cold, biting, familiar. He stepped forward. 1 step, 2 steps. The floor groaned beneath his shoes like the house itself wanted to warn him. The therapist didn't move. Michael raised the knife and stopped. Because suddenly, horribly, he understood. The therapist wasn't afraid because there was nothing to fear, because Michael wasn't in control. He never had been. Every session, every question, every long pause while the therapist watched him sweat in silence, thinking he was the one steering the conversation. It was all a maze, and Michael had been the rat. The knife trembled in his grip. His breath came in ragged bursts, now chest heaving like something was breaking loose inside him. "You did this," Michael whispered. "You made me into this." The therapist smiled. "No," he said softly. "I only showed you what you already were." The words slid under Michael's skin like ice water. His fingers went slack. The knife clattered to the floor. For the first time in years, Michael felt small. He realized the game had never been about killing. It had been about control, and he had already lost. The therapist rose slowly, his movements precise, unhurried, like a man stepping into a role he had been waiting to play all along. He picked up the knife from the floor and set it gently on the table between them. "You see now, don't you?" the therapist said, voice almost kind. "The moment you walked through my door, the ending was written." Michael stared at him, empty, broken, fury draining into something colder, fear, because he finally understood. He wasn't the predator. He had never been. He was the prey, and the hunt had ended long before he knew it had even begun.